Hi, it's UHD Carlson here. When you think about serial killers in cinema, who comes to mind? Some of the names that might come up include Freddy, Jason, Chucky, Michael Myers, Leatherface, but there's one that doesn't get talked about often enough, and that's the granddaddy of them all, Norman Bates, first appearing in 1960's Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and then appearing in 3 much later released sequels. Arrow Video has given us an import release of the 4 Psycho films starring Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates in this brand new import set. I'm going to unbox this release and share my opinions. Again, this is an import release. This is not available domestically. It's also only 4K discs. There are no Blu-ray discs included. Any screen caps you see in this are taken from earlier Blu-ray releases of the film because, unfortunately, I can't do screen caps for 4K, so just giving you the obligatory disclaimer there. Nice close-up of Mother with the knife there. Of course, I don't think there's anyone in this world that doesn't know that image. Titles of the films, got the Arrow logo down there, got the 18 content rating. Side of the spine there gives us the titles of the film, the Psycho Collection. On this side, you can see the spines of the individual movies. On the back, we have a description of the set that lists all the features. And then, of course, the slipcover comes off. There's Mother again, spine. The Bates house. Top of the box and bottom of the box are just plain. And we'll take these out. In addition to the 4 films, we also get a book. First of all, the 2 things that are not included in this set are the 1987 made-for-TV Bates Motel film, which did not feature Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, and then also the 1998 remake of Psycho, which starred Vince Vaughn. I don't think most people are going to miss those too much, but I am just pointing that out for anyone who might be curious. Here's the cover of the book. Got some great info, photos, and essays from the films. I'm not going to go through every single page. I'll just show a few of these off. And then, of course, after the first film, we go from black and white to color, so I am happy to see this booklet doesn't just talk about the original film, which is the one most people talk about. In fact, I'm willing to bet most people don't even know that Psycho's a franchise. They probably think it's only one movie. Even got the Psycho 2 soundtrack liner notes. That's very cool. And then another nice shot of the Bates house in the back. So I'm just going to go through disc by disc, movie by movie, and talk a little bit about what's in here. We start off with Alfred Hitchcock's original film, Psycho, from 1960, of course based on the novel by Robert Bloch. Here's our cover art for Psycho, and that looks very nice. There's our spine, back cover. And we do get some little bonus goodies in here as well. Psycho comes with some postcards here. That's on the back of all of them. And then we got Marion Crane, Norman Bates, and Lila Crane. We also in here get an ad for Arrow Video streaming services. And then there's this on the back. I have no idea what this is an ad for. If anybody knows that, please comment down below and let me know, because I'm curious now. And each one of the movies also includes a mini poster. One side of the poster includes the art for the film that's on the disc cover, and then the back cover features retro-style art that we also get as the reversible covers of these sleeves. Now, I'm not going to reverse the cover art sleeves in this video because, again, the cover art reversed is just the same as the backs of the posters, so I think it would be a little redundant to do that, and I don't want to make this video any longer than I have to. There's the disc of the first film. From what I can tell, this is identical to the same release that Universal put out a few months ago. All of the Psycho films after the original were released by Universal Studios. Paramount released the original film, but Universal now owns the rights and distributes the movie. And here's the description of the first film as follows. Shattering expectations and shocking audiences around the world, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho changed the face of cinema in 1960. It remains one of the most iconic and influential movies ever made. Dreaming of a new life with her debt-ridden lover, Marion Crane goes on the run with $40,000 stolen from her employer. When bad weather forces her to seek shelter for the night, she pulls in at the isolated Bates Motel run by lonely Norman and his overbearing mother who live at the house on the hill out back. But nothing is quite what it seems. When Marion goes missing, her lover Sam and sister Lila begin an investigation that will reveal the shocking truth of what lies beneath the surface of a normal, quiet town and the skull beneath the skin of a normal, quiet man with an interest in taxidermy. A masterful exercise in suspense and terror, Psycho has lost none of its ability to jolt an audience from their seats or make them squirm in fear, and in 4K Ultra High Definition, the film looks as sharp as the blade of a knife. Psycho is one of the greatest films ever made. Quite possibly Alfred Hitchcock's best film and best known film. Interestingly, this was actually made on a shoestring budget using his Alfred Hitchcock Presents television crew, and it was made in black and white despite the fact that most of Hitch's most recent films prior to that were done in color. Personally, I don't think this movie really would have worked too well in color, and it really shows throughout. I think Hitch manages to convey that unsettling mood. I mean, we get some pretty shocking depictions of, an unmarried couple rendezvousing at a hotel in a city, a young woman who wants to have a new life with her lover to the point that she's willing to embezzle money to get there, and of course the aftermath and her lover, of course, connecting with her sister and the quest to go find her and see why she's gone missing. The shower scene remains one of the most iconic scenes in cinematic history. I'm not going to get too into details here, as well as the plot twists involving Norman Bates, because I know there still are some people out there that haven't seen this film, and I'm not going to go into spoiler territory here, but I don't really have to say much because I think Psycho speaks for itself. This is a cinematic classic and one of my favorite films of all time. And believe it or not, the Psycho story did not end with one movie. It took 22 years, but eventually we did get a sequel. That sequel being Psycho 2, released in 1982. And we'll do a quick unboxing of this one. Once again, we got a mini poster and some postcards. This is on the back of the postcards. We've got an older Norman Bates, his young interest in the film, and then, of course, an aged Lila. We then have our mini poster. On this side, we have the same as the cover art for the disc and arrows set. And on the back side, we have the vintage style art. And again, if you reverse the sleeve on here, this is the reversible art that you get. Here is the disc itself. And I'll read the description of the movie from the back of the case. Norman Bates is coming home. Just when you thought it was safe to step back into the shower, Norman Bates returns in this expertly crafted sequel to the iconic Hitchcock classic. Boldly following in the master's footsteps, Australian filmmaker Richard Franklin not only delivers on the promise of his earlier films, but arguably lives up to Hitch's original. Norman Bates is declared sane and released from the facility in which he was being held, despite the complaints of Lila Loomis, sister of Norman's most famous victim. All Norman wants to do is live quietly and productively as a normal member of society. But is returning to the house he once shared with his mother and running the hotel that was the site of so many grisly murders really a good idea? Is he really cured, or will he kill again? With a fantastic script by Tom Holland, cinematography from Dean Cundy, and standout performances by original cast members Anthony Perkins and Vera Miles, along with newcomer Meg Tilly, Psycho 2 is a tour de force of suspense and thrills that will keep you guessing to the very end. I've been watching the original Psycho since I was a little boy. I mean, Hitch's direction, Bernard Herrmann's classic score, including the violins in the shower. How could you possibly top a classic? I mean, I didn't even know until years later there were sequels. Psycho 2, I'm not going to lie, is not as good as the original film, but very few things are. That said, though, this is a surprisingly entertaining sequel. Of course, Lila and Norman Bates are played once again by Vera Miles and Anthony Perkins, respectively. But we get some newcomers to the series, including Meg Tilly as a young lady working with a rehabilitated Norman who he takes an interest in, Robert Loggia as his therapist, and Dennis Franz, who's been running the Bates Motel his own way while Norman's been confined. The plot goes in some very interesting directions. Understandably, Lila isn't too happy that Norman Bates, the killer of her sister, is being released, and she wants to do everything she can to make sure she stays in jail. There are some very interesting plot twists here about halfway through the movie. You certainly won't look at Lila the same way again, and even the filmmakers did express some displeasure as to how they depicted her in certain fashions in the film many years later. The movie was actually written by Tom Holland, who would later go on to direct the first Child's Play movie, and Dean Cundey was cinematographer on this, who had worked on the Halloween franchise as well. I mean, this movie brings Psycho into the 1980s, and it actually does it surprisingly well. Unfortunately, it is about 15 minutes longer than it needs to be, and the final 15 minutes introduce even more plot twists to the point that the movie kind of ends up overdoing it, and it collapses on itself as a result. I won't get into details here, but you probably will wish the movie was a little shorter after you see it and see where they go in the final act. And moving down the list, of course, we get to the next movie, Psycho 3, which was released in 1985. This was the only one of the 4 Psycho movies starring Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, which he also directed. Here's the cover art. Same deal inside, we do get a mini poster as well as some postcards. Here we get the back cover, again, pretty similar to the artwork we get on the cover. There we got a new guest, the Bates Motel. The man who ends up working part-time and has his own agenda. And the beginning of the film with our 2 drifters who, of course, wind up at the Bates Motel. Here's our mini poster for this film. And then we reverse this and we get the vintage style artwork. I do like that there with Norman holding the room key. That looks great. Here's the disc itself. Oddly enough, this one has a 15 rating rather than the 18 rating all the other movies do, which is funny because ironically, I think this is probably the most sensual and violent one of all the movies. And I'll read the description on the back of the case. Norman Bates is back to normal, but Mother's off her rocker again. Psycho 3 sees Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates himself, take the franchise reins for his directorial debut, bringing a stylish flair that suggests his time working with not only Alfred Hitchcock, but Orson Welles and Ken Russell was very well spent. 1 month after the event of Psycho 2, and all seems well at the Bates Motel. But there's a corpse in the house and a waitress missing, and people are starting to wonder. Desperate for money, sleazy drifter Dwayne Duke takes a job at the motel and becomes suspicious of Norman, threatening him with blackmail. Meanwhile, curious reporter Tracy Venables is in town looking for a scoop and intent on solving the mystery of the missing waitress. When Maureen Coyle, a suicidal nun who resembles Norman's former victim Marion Crane, arrives at the motel, all bets are off and Mother is less than happy, especially when Norman begins to fall in love. Working with acclaimed cinematographer Bruce Surtees, Perkins brings a visual panache reminiscent of the Italian giallo, while adding a dash of 80s slasher and a pinch of jet black humor as he continues to explore and expand the character of Norman Bates. A worthy successor to Hitchcock and Franklin's prior films, and looking better than ever in its UHD debut, Psycho 3 is ripe for rediscovery. Psycho 3, of course, pretty much continues where Psycho 2 left off, with Norman starting to, again, try to live his old life once again, try to be a sane man, but unfortunately, the curse of Mother seems to preside over him, and it begins to manifest itself in some very strange and violent ways. The supporting cast in this is actually very interesting. We do get a male drifter who's sort of a wannabe rock and roller wanting to get to Hollywood, and then you have a young nun who's been excommunicated following an accident of hers that resulted in someone else's death. And these two, of course, meet on the road, but they meet again at the Bates Motel, and there's some very interesting investigations going on. What's really interesting is you actually have a town here that seems to support Norman Bates and think he's an upstanding citizen who's served his debt to society and wants to go on living his life. So you actually get defenders of the character, which is a nice change of pace. And on top of that, supporting cast actually is not half bad. The musical score for this movie is done by Carter Burwell in one of his earliest projects. Burwell would probably best be known in the future for scoring the films of the Coen brothers. So we do get a lot of talent on deck for this movie, and while I wouldn't say this is the best Psycho film by any means, it's certainly not a bad one. I've read mixed reviews, but I personally enjoyed this one. And we do have one more movie in the set. This one actually was made for TV, albeit for a premium cable channel, so that doesn't mean it's any sort of watered down garbage. That is Psycho 4: The Beginning. Unlike the other two films, this one's actually 2 discs. We get one in the widescreen aspect ratio, which is actually preferred by the filmmakers, and then an open matte full screen version, which is presumably identical to how the movie aired on TV originally. There are no art cards with this one, but we do get a mini poster, so I'll show that off real quick. Here's the cover art, similar to the one that, of course, is used for Arrow's cover art. And on the back, we have the vintage style art here. And I don't really see any credits or anything down here, so I wonder if there even was original poster art for this one, given that it was actually made for television, again, under slightly different circumstances from the other Psycho films that starred Anthony Perkins. I'll read the description of the film as follows from the back. You've met Norman, now meet Mother. Written by Joseph Stefano, screenwriter of the original 1960 film, and directed by Mick Garris, Psycho 4 shows us how it all began in Anthony Perkins' final appearance in the iconic role of Norman Bates. Rehabilitated and now happily married, Norman is living a new life, finally free from the homicidal influence of his abusive mother. But his wife is pregnant, and Norman finds himself afraid that the child will inherit his mental illness. When he hears radio talk show host Fran Ambrose discussing the topic of matricide with psychologist Dr. Leo Richmond, Norman calls under a false name to tell his story. Starring Henry Thomas as young Norman and Olivia Hussey as his mother, Norma, Psycho 4 gets back to the beginning to bring the story to a satisfying end. This, of course, like I just said, was the final of the 4 Psycho films in which Norman Bates was portrayed by Anthony Perkins. This movie is a little different from the others because it's part sequel, part prequel. There is a story set in the present where Norman calls into a radio show to tell his story because he has an urge to kill again, not wanting to bring a child into this world that has his mental illness, talking to a radio show host played by CCH Pounder. And she actually lends some gravity to the film and helps to keep things grounded, and it actually gives sort of an interesting excuse for Norman to tell his story. Most of the movie takes place in flashback with Henry Thomas playing the young Norman and Olivia Hussey portraying the still living Norma Bates. Olivia Hussey, of course, best known for portraying Juliet in the classic 1960s Franco Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet. So you get a great cast, despite the fact that this one went straight to the premium channels. The problem is, well, there's actually a few problems. First of all, this movie, despite being called Psycho 4, ignores the other 2 sequels and seems to serve as a direct sequel to the original film, which, of course, throws a lot of the mythology of what was told in Psycho 2 and 3 out the window, and that's a little disappointing for fans. The other problem is the narrative structure is a complete mess. Norman Bates calling into a radio show to tell his story and now he might be tempted to kill again, that's a great idea for a film. The problem is the flashbacks are completely out of order. There's really no coherency, and you pretty much have to kind of put these together yourself and determine what was set when. We have a scene of Norman and a pretty young girl, and he goes up to talk to the corpse of his mother. And then several scenes later, we have Norman at the same age, but his mother's still alive. Then we have scenes of a much younger child Norman, and it just jumps all over the place. If this had been at least somewhat chronological in the way it told his story, that could have worked out very well. We also have the issue of Norman has been released, and one of his doctors fell in love with him, and they now live together. The problem is we don't really learn how they fell in love with each other. What would it take for you to fall in love with Norman Bates, who has literally been a homicidal maniac and killed people on several occasions? At the end of the movie, we shift more into the present, and the conflict begins to unfold. But again, we don't really have the gravity there for that to have the impact. I don't think Psycho 4 is a bad film, but I also don't think it's a great one either, and I would put it below the other ones just due to its sloppy narrative structure and the lack of any real context in the modern setting aside from the radio show scenes and so forth. So we just looked at 4 Psycho films on 4K courtesy of Arrow Video. I'm happy to say all of these films look absolutely gorgeous in 4K. I wouldn't exactly expect the Psycho sequels to get this treatment, but every movie in this set looks absolutely beautiful. Understandably, there are a few effect shots that aren't going to look as good as the rest of the films, but that's just par for the course when it's the nature of the source material. The original Psycho, from what I can tell, is identical to Universal's previously released 4K disc of the movie, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually a fantastic-looking black and white title. When we start getting into the 80s and early 90s color films, they look just as good. Arrow Video has absolutely outdone themselves with this set. These movies look gorgeous, and I could not ask for anything more in terms of picture quality. All 4 movies also have HDR, no Dolby Vision, but again, I don't know that you really even needed Dolby Vision considering how good the HDR and the transfers on these are. You do get the perfect little uptick in terms of shadows, black levels, detail, colors that pop off the screen when a scene calls for them. It's a perfect set in regards to image quality. We also get a ton of bonus features for each movie, including commentary tracks, vintage featurettes, newer featurettes that were put out by Arrow just for this set. And also, we got that booklet that I showed off earlier. So, again, Arrow absolutely did not skimp on this release, and it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, just a few months ago, we got that Bruce Lee box set from Arrow, and now we have this. And before the end of the year, we're even going to have Arrow releasing The Warriors in 4K. So, I am very happy with the work this company has been doing. They may very well be my new favorite home video company, and releases like this are solid proof of why that is. If you're a Psycho fan, do not hesitate to import this set. It is absolutely worth it. Are you a fan of the Psycho films? What's your favorite one? Do you think the sequels are very good, or do you think they're vastly inferior to Hitchcock's original? What's your opinion? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel for more content. I'm always posting new videos. And make sure you give this one a like if you found it helpful. I'm Taylor T. Carlson. I'll see you next time.